I think that a lot of the literature in strategic management is very much about that too. Is how you make sure that you follow the trends and how small trends will become the big ones in the future. And therefore, how do you pick up the signals about the trends, which might be the big ones, but at the moment are rather small and perhaps out of your radar. So how do you keep track of that and be able to just not stop thinking about change? And I think that's very important. And I think there's a lot to say about safety and change. Actually, I think this starting the conversation about change, how do you pick up signals, has a lot to do with safety as well. A lot of the problems in safety, I suppose, are quite connected with the ability to understand the implications of change and how things might impact your business or impact your operations, and how do you anticipate that? How do you think ahead, and how do you get signals before they become big signals, but too late? Yeah, so I see a lot of connections here. That's one thing that I've been working on with mentioning strategy and safety. I think the two are pretty strongly connected, in my view.
Absolutely. Well, welcome to the podcast. It's wonderful to have you here. And for those who are listening, we're sitting here having a conversation with J.C. Le Coze, and he's the head of research on human and organizational factors at EH&S.
That's right. Yes, National Institute for Environmental Safety over here in France.
Thank you for that. I was wondering exactly what the letters were for. So interesting title, but let us know, how did you get into occupational health and safety?
Yeah, I'm into process safety, occupational health and safety, safety critical systems. And I've started as a fireman, perhaps 25 years ago. I was training to become an officer, but then I changed my mind. But I kept a strong connections to safety, and then I kept on studying and ended up with a PhD in safety. And that's how, I suppose, I got my connections with safety at the start, with being a fireman and having an interest for safety through, obviously, the activity of firefighting and other kind of things.
And so when we were discussing before, you were talking about safety and change and picking up the signals. I love that. I actually am a professional social worker. That's my degree. And so I think we might have a little bit in common as far as crisis management goes. Because in crisis management, it's not something you can learn on the fly. I don't know about your training as a firefighter, but I'm pretty confident that you had a lot of drills, a lot of going through, a lot of experiences thrown at you in various different ways, so that you would have a baseline of what to have expected. And we do that in social work too. 5 years of our training as well is having simulations, if you will, of different experiences, which is why when we walk into something, sometimes it doesn't seem like it's a new experience because we've had it in simulation. Do you think that those type of things help with you picking up signals? Because that's one of the things you were talking about, right? Being able to pick up signals so that you pick up the signals before it's too late. I think that's really key to safety.
Oh, it is, definitely. I think, there's this notion of resilience that you must have heard of, the ability to cope with unexpected events or complexity more generally. And I think that, in fact, in resilience, there's a lot of training, a lot of preparation. You become resilient because you have put a lot of effort in trying to think about what could happen and getting ready for it. Therefore, I think that we need to be careful when we use the notion of resilience which would be this idea that people are able to cope with things when they happen in unexpected ways. But in reality, they are more able to cope with these things if they are very much prepared. So that's one aspect. And I think when it comes to signals, there is a bit of that certainly, but also the ability to challenge your mindset to a way that you do not expect it. So even if you're trained into something, perhaps that the very fact of being trained is a problem in itself because you have been framed in a certain way. So I suppose that there are two aspects to that. It's good to be trained in case of something that happened and you've got a range of ability to take decisions because you've rehearsed that, but also you need to be able in certain circumstances to think about how to challenge what you've learned. I think it's a matter also of temporality, when things happen very fast or when things happen very slow. I think when it comes to signals and weak signals in safety or in strategy contexts, the pattern or the temporality might be a slow one, not a crisis management one when you have to do something very quickly to find a solution to something that wasn't expected or needs a resolution very quickly. Weak signals in strategy or even in safety, and the two, like I said earlier, are, in my view, strongly connected when we talk about companies, is that the temporality might be longer. The signals accumulate over a longer period of time, and you get surprised at the end because you didn't make sense of these signals over a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and then at the end, the signals are meaningful, but it's too late. So in this kind of temporality, it's not the training that matters, it's how much you're able to think outside the box and accept that your kind of scripts or templates or mindset are challenged and accept that. And that's sometimes very difficult when it comes to strategy or in safety, because most of the time, at least for people in charge of safety management, in charge of companies, they're actually very much involved in what they put in place. And therefore, that it is a challenge to them because this is what they've kind of pushed forward. And therefore, there's this kind of problem of power as well. You know, how much are you able to be challenged by different kind of people, although you are in a position of power in your company or, you know, at a high level. I think that's a crucial aspect of safety, I think, and strategy as well, more generally.
Now, I also want to go back to, you were talking about training.
Yeah.
And I think this is an interesting one because never before when I've gotten into training in health and safety, it's like retraining somebody 10 times how to use a ladder, retraining somebody, you know, over the same thing over and over again. And I remember when I first came into safety and I was given all the safety training and I was like, well, was there more? Like, what's after this? Oh no, we just keep doing this over and over. And I was like, that's not really training, right?
No.
Training is something that you're taking somebody from the level, the knowledge level that they have, and you're helping to level them up. Could we agree on that?
Yeah, I think like training has to be linked to practice very concretely. So therefore, if you're talking about training in a room, just giving explanation about something, how much of this is relevant depends on your ability to translate this in concrete situations, in concrete practices. So there's much to think about training when it comes to safety in relation to practices, concrete practices, relevance to practices. And therefore, if this link does not exist, then the training itself might be a problem. And therefore, you need to make sure that it's meaningful in relation to practice. So therefore, the latter thing has to be connected somehow to something realistic and something that makes sense to people who are supposed to apply some of the rules that you might expect them to apply. And therefore, this also pushes the training context to be relevant to practice. I think that's the key issue there. Otherwise, you miss your target.
And I like what you were saying before, when you're doing training, you have to think about what could happen and then get ready for it, right?
Yeah,
But do
yeah,
it in a way that every time you're thinking about what else could happen, right?
yeah,
So for example, because I was in a grocery retail and ladder training was consistent, I would do exactly that. I'd say, okay, well, they know how to use the ladder. We don't have to
yeah,
go over that every single time. And you keep track of who you're training. And then that's exactly what we would be doing for our ladder training is what could happen.
yeah,
Okay, so this is a scenario that
yeah,
has just happened with the ladder. Now,
yeah,
what are the steps in order to get help or solve this problem, right?
yeah, yeah.
And and so what are you thinking about how could people be pushing in safety to do training that is leveling it up? Because I don't think the next generation who can Google everything is going to be wanting the basic training that typically comes out of health and safety. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, again, my view of that is that practice matters tremendously to relevance. So if you teach or train people about things that they cannot connect to their own practice, their reality, daily reality, then you miss your target. They're not going to be able to translate your ideas into something that is meaningful, something that they can apply, but you lose a bit of legitimacy as well. They're not listening to you because they cannot connect with your message. And therefore, I think that what matters tremendously is the ability to put yourself in the shoes of the person you're talking to and think about, okay, what will be the relevance of what I'm saying in relation to specific practices. And therefore, it is also in the interaction of training, finding out about how people can make sense of it and to make sure that what you're saying is meaningful to them. So yeah, I would certainly talk to them in relation to their practice mostly and see if that is relevant. But that is the basic kind of human factors kind of approach, ergonomics, the type of thing that always situate workers in their context. And if you do not do that, then you're likely not to be very interesting to them and for them to lose their time as well, because they'll be listening to things that they know they can't apply, for instance. And therefore you create this gap, and especially I think in health and safety, when you've got a top-down rule kind of approach, legal approach of things without having this translation process in relation to practice, then yeah, you end up with a bad approach to prevention strategies, I think.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, connecting with those who are doing the job
Yeah,
and learning about what are the real risks and hazards that are
yeah,
on the job.
yeah,
For example, I remember in Toronto, just a little while back, there was a video going around of somebody who had not let go of the tether
yeah,
on a load and had been lifted up by a crane, right? And you could hear the other guys around in the video saying to him, just hold on, just keep holding on, right?
yeah,
And it wasn't just one voice saying that to him, it was a group of voices. So very clearly, there was some sort of training there
yeah,
that they had a uniform voice of telling the person, and then you could hear also saying, where's the spotter, we need to get this message to whomever. And it was right down the line in like the different videos that we heard, different voices saying this. And that
yeah,
to me is an indicator that I don't know if it was experience that these individuals had or
yeah,
if it was training that these individuals had. But whatever it was, they were all very kind of in sync on
yeah,
at this critical situation.
yeah,
Really, and the person was brought down with a broken wrist, which is pretty remarkable for something like that, because they
yeah,
were like 5 to 30. They were going from 5 floors, and the guy was going up to 30, but he was told and brought the person down. right? And I'm not saying you should simulate that kind of critical incident with an actual crane. However, it really illustrated that because there were people in the crew that knew some instructions to the new worker, that really helped kind of orchestrate getting a solution done.
Yeah, I think we are here in the description of what I introduced earlier, in my view, with the notion of context. And work context include the design and engineering context of what's going on, the circumstances, specific circumstances in specific moments, but also the group aspect and the people around. Most of the time, apart from certain situations, you're part of a team. You're part of a collective. Many people are around. So I guess we touched a little bit on culture here, and the fact that what's going on around you has a lot of impact on your behavior. And therefore, I think if we try to connect training with what we're talking now, it certainly has something to do with how things happen in a certain company, certain moments, in specific teams. And therefore, this is where context matters as well. Because we know, for instance, in many cases that according to departments or even teams, things can be done differently. That's something that we've heard of, that we've observed in many cases, I think most of us. And therefore, we know that matters. The context and the social, basically the social context or the sociological context within which you work. So that's something that needs to be taken into account as well. That, in my view, is part of defining practice. Is it an isolated practice, or is it something you do with a lot of people around? Or, if, for instance, you have to use a ladder, are you on your own to do it, or you got other people around? If you got other people around, you've got different strategies, you can do different options. And therefore, again, that's part of context, practice, that matters tremendously. And I think a lot of the problem today in safety is the lack of context in the way things are designed, sometimes also taught. And therefore, this is something that needs to be clearly part of the expertise of HSE professionals, thinking the context of practices.
And another great thing is that, you can also be leveraging your workforce to be listening out for those signals. Right?
Yeah.
It's not you have to do it all by yourself type of thing, or only the health and safety team.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. No, it has to be a management thing, supervisor thing as well. It's something that needs to be encouraged, during team meetings, and it's something that you build collectively as well. It's not. Most of the problems in safety are social problems, in the sense that you cannot understand any behavior, any decisions out of a specific social and material context. And therefore, the level of safety is kind of reflecting on the organization very much. And therefore, what you described here is definitely the product of an organization deciding on putting a number of resources, whether they're material resources or managerial resources, for picking up signals, for making the effort to do that, to encourage people to do it. And all the way from the top to down to the really concrete work being done and supervised by people. I think a lot of safety has to do with the collective aspect, the teamwork. Is something that we really need to focus on. Often, safety is seen as a kind of a behavioral problem, isolating people from their context. And I think we need to go beyond this and to be really, I think a lot of people are doing it already anyway. But I think it's very important what you're saying here. Picking up signals is a product of an organization of social interactions. It's not just an isolated thing.
Now, what about using leveraging different technology for simulating situations?
Yeah.
Do you think that really helps? Because I can see how it can help in doing the motions, but does that help with the development of the team connection? Because when a crisis happens, there's also a synergy that can go through the team in order to just kind of do things in a sync.
Yeah, I think as for many things, you need to combine your options. And I think simulations has a great potential, but it has limitations. And therefore, you need to have drills as well, like real life kind of drills. And that combines with simulations during which you can do a number of things, but during which you also are limited in the number of things you can do. Although today, I suppose that with new technologies, you're able perhaps to put people together in kind of simulations that would replicate real life context to a certain extent. But these are always like restricted scenario because real life situations cannot be replicated fully. And we know that because, for instance, when you visit plants, when you do studies of daily operations, you see the difference between a drill, when people are actually simulating a crisis situation, and a real one. And the difference is that during the drill, people remain kind of cool. But when it's a real crisis, you see people running around far more and being far more stressed. Yes. So it's always very difficult to simulate real life situations because there are specific things in real life that you cannot kind of anticipate, and things are always different. So in real life, so you need to combine things. Simulation is great, but do other things too. Never stick to just one options or methods, in my view.
Absolutely. Now, we are having the EH&S Congress happening in Berlin in September. It's the 13th to the 14th. And I understand that you'll be speaking at that.
Yeah, it's Aaron and Andrew asked me to host a workshop. Last year, I spoke there, introduced the idea of what I call the HSE professional blues. The fact that a number of people in the profession today are quite critical about practices in safety management. So I introduced that last year, and they asked me to come back this year to host a workshop, 2 hours workshop, so that people can think about this issue of these blues. Why are we having today people complaining about their work situation as HSE professional? What do they think is wrong today in the profession, and what are the ways of improving that if they agree that there is a problem? So I think the basic idea of the workshop is really to get people together, I think be about a bit more than 20 people, and go through this issue of the blues. Why are we unhappy in the profession? And first of all, do you agree with this, first of all? Do you recognize yourself in a number of statements that professionals have been producing over the past few years? And if you agree, what do you think would be the possibilities for improving the situation? So that's one workshop. But they've asked me as well to potentially do another workshop, which would be about the changes of the past 30 to 40 years in safety management and safety models and safety science research, which is something I've been involved quite deeply over the past 20 years.
Well, and there have been a lot of changes.
Yeah.
There's been there's been a demographic shift in who's even responsible as a health and safety professional for it. I mean, you've got a lot more females coming into the field, and a lot more people of racial backgrounds coming into the field, and that's going to be shifting in the way that we perceive risk, as well in the way we solution. What are your thoughts around that? Am I onto something, or?
Yes, absolutely. As a generation or a type of people being involved change, there are implications. One thing is that we don't always know what are the implications right away, because you need things to happen at least a little bit to get a bit of an experience on the implications, the concrete outcome of this change. Therefore, it means that we need to be, again, going back to the beginning of this conversation, we need to be aware of the signals that indicate the consequences of these changes. And what does it mean in terms of practice? What does it mean in terms of the impacts for practices, for instance, but also the way people perceive their roles, their identity, and what they expect from work. And I think that is very important to be open to that. It might be more challenging than we expect, because it means that we need to listen to people and perhaps ask questions that are not asked. And therefore, we don't hear about the problems or the changes or the motivations that might evolve as well. So need to be open-minded, keep asking the right questions as well, and make sure that things are in the picture and see it as an issue rather than seeing as something that might not need any kind of thoughts,
And now I wanted to go back to what you were talking about. You were talking about the HSE blues.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you're going to be talking about at the conference.
Yeah.
And so if there is a listener if that's resonating with them right now,
Yeah.
what could they be doing, and could they be connecting with you in order to share their experience if you're looking to learn more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good idea. What I'm doing, as part of a research is to try to build programs so that these type of topics are kind of investigated and looked into and perhaps improved if we can. So yeah, happy to get in touch with people who would feel that they want to think about it, they want to do something about these blues, the fact that they reject some of the practices, or they're unhappy, or they've got a level of discontent about what's going on today in the profession. And therefore, perhaps build something around that, maybe empirical studies, discussions. But, somehow I'm just trying to frame something that is already out there. I mean, I think you're on LinkedIn, I am on LinkedIn too. And I can see a lot of talking around, safety differently, for instance, things like safety too. There's a lot of people and a lot of work going on at the moment, challenging a number of practices of EHS people. And therefore, I think we're part of this kind of movement or kind of new options that people would like to see in place or implemented in the years to come. But it's challenging because you might wish things to change, but the reality of the context, regulatory context, so legal context, certification context, create difficulties for people to change practices. Therefore, I think there is a tension out there between I'm unhappy, I'd like things to change a little bit, and how am I able to do and something about the context which creates these problems. And therefore, I think, it'd be interesting to hear about the real concrete possibilities of making a change, considering the level of discontent of a number of people. But mind you, there might be a lot of people happy with their job as well. It's just not something that applies to everybody, but certainly to a number of professionals out there.
So what would be your top recommendations if somebody is feeling what we're calling the HSE blues, coined by JC? What would be your recommendation to get them into that mindset of kind of figuring out the first steps, whatever they might be?
From what I studied, I mean, the blues come from a combination of myself being part of ethnographic studies. So I talk a lot with safety professionals, and I read these books by a number of professionals who wrote these books for professionals, saying that there's something wrong about the profession, let's do something about it. And what they do about it is that they go beyond, I would say, their initial training and education, and they learn more about psychology, they know more about sociology, they learn about a number of disciplines which changes their mindset and see the world a little bit differently, and therefore help them think about alternative strategies. And they're less naive about what's going on around them, and therefore they kind of move on and move away from the dissatisfaction by, first of all, getting more knowledgeable about a number of realities of companies. And in this case, and I'm thinking about these people, they're right. They interact with people, they share their problems, and therefore they're trying to create the environment where they can share this, where they can find out solutions, options to make a change. So therefore, I would recommend to broaden your intellectual horizon by being open to reading stuff, looking into sociology, psychology, slowly learn different things that might go beyond the original or initial educational background, and then get in touch with people with the same kind of approach, and therefore build the kind of favorable environment for your initiatives to thrive and to be concrete as well, in terms of translating this at work, if possible, but at least build this kind of environment for which you might find resources to move on, in which you find the resources to move on. So these are the kind of ideas that I've got, trying to answer your question. Don't know if that's good enough, but.
So what you're saying is become more knowledgeable about different discipline views.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Learn about other organizations that are doing things really well.
Yeah.
What are they doing differently? And I would even push to reach out to those senior leaders at those organizations. Because I know, for example, Ben Legg, he tells me that he's always open to talking to people about what they're doing in their
That's right.
company.
Yes. Very good point. Yeah.
So networking with others.
Yeah. Don't hesitate. I think LinkedIn now get people writing directly because it's pretty easy to do that. That's the power of social media. You should use that. I do not hesitate to contact people and say, oh, I read this, you wrote this, and that's interesting. What about you doing this in your company? Or what about you researching that topic? What does it mean for us in practice? So yeah, do not hesitate to interact with the outside world. And that's so much easier these days than it was like 15 years ago, or 20, I suppose, because of the social media. So yeah, definitely, that's a very good point. Absolutely.
And the other thing
when you mention, I would like to say, sorry to interrupt, that senior leaders, but also operational people. I think that there is a combination there to have between top people who have a vision, who have a broad perspective because of their career, but also the kind of ability to see bigger, considering their position in a company, but also operational people. What are the solutions they really find relevant to improve practices? And I think a combination of operational and top management kind of thing is important.
Another thing you were talking about was broadening our mindset to be beyond the typical HSE knowledge base. Maybe you could share a little bit more on that.
I think like a lot of the basic EH&S educational program is very much engineering oriented, very much legally oriented as well, knowing the regulations, knowing the engineering. What about humans? What about organizations? What about the reality of everyday organizations, everyday life? And therefore, this is something, some people talk about soft skills and other type of things. And I think there's this soft idea that is something that you don't perhaps learn, or something that you're not trained to, or something that you do not take into account because it's something that is soft in comparison to something like hard, like the hard sciences, like engineering, chemical, and just chemistry, all these things. And I think there is this need for embracing. What I'm saying is not entirely new. Okay, I mean, I think a lot of EH&S programs include this, but it has to be stronger. It has to be taken seriously, not something that is something that we add a little bit. It should be central, should be core. Okay, and I think like many cases, it is not core of EHS education. It's something that is added, perhaps sometimes even missing, but not seen as the kind of backbone. It should be. Engineering and legal and regulation and very important legal aspects, but you really have to include as well other things like psychology, sociology, all sorts of human and social sciences, history as well. History matters tremendously to understand a number of things.
Yeah, I was very floored when I did my health and safety university courses. At no time, JC, did they talk about the human factor, the actual way that the human brain functions and works to make decisions. And also, they never even talked about group dynamics. And I was like, seriously? How could you be missing out? Like, that's how decisions are influenced in an organization. That's what makes your culture that you guys all go on about.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You know, part of the blues aspect that I was referring to earlier is a reaction by a number of professionals against this lack of education based on these insights. Psychology, you're using the notion of human brain, decision-making, team realities, organization, bureaucracies, all the things that EHS people have to deal with every day is out of the picture as a basic ingredient. That's wrong. It's incredibly wrong. But I think it is also a way of maturing as a profession to realize slowly that this kind of background is insufficiently part of the degree. And I think, you know, somehow it is up to the profession and people with experience to slowly make that point and say, well, look, we can't carry on like this. We've got 20 years or 25 years of experience as HSE professionals. We need to have this as a basic ingredient of education, because this is something that matters tremendously and that we had to deal with it and learn by ourselves about it. And the books that I've been referring to regarding the blues is very much the story of these people as HSE professional being unhappy about the content of their educational background and providing with these books a revision of what should be the basic knowledge taught to HSE people so that they start their career with the right knowledge and to be relevant. And I think when you frame the world through an engineering and legal mindset as an HSE professional, you miss a big part of the picture. And that's what they're probably saying. That's how I interpret it. Yeah, we need to make a move and to be better at doing this soft part of the education stronger. And I don't think
I also wanted to add that health and safety has been around for quite a while now. This whole thing, like, oh, we haven't been around that long. Well, if you go back to what you were saying about history, right? My understanding is, at least here in Ontario, our Occupational Health and Safety Act is actually from what was termed, I believe it's the British Factory Act.
Yeah.
Is that right? And was it the 17th or 18th century?
Yeah, it goes back to it goes back to early manufacturing.
Yeah.
And when they started to regulate this, of course, not with the same extent as today, not with the same kind of research and method. But yes, the ideas have been around for that. Safety and occupational safety matters have been around for quite some time. And you see in a number of studies, indeed, that the importance of taking into account human beings, what we know about them, it's always been around. That you always had either consultants or or people involved in HSE, flagging the importance of bringing what we know about people, about psychology, about sociology, organization into the picture. But I think now, with the knowledge available, we can do this increasingly well, and we need to. And the blues is very much about that. The blues is the reaction. The blues is to say, enough of that. Let's make EHS a real profession because we take this into account.
Yeah. It's been 140 years to be exact up here in Ontario in Canada, because our first one was out in 1884. And I think that, and the reason I'm bringing this up again is because what you were talking about, history matters, right? And I think also you have to look at who held the social power at the time, and who was making the rules. And maybe the reason that you're feeling the blues or depressed or frustrated is because you're actually dealing with more of a systemic issue. What about that? Because that's harder to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. That was part of my explanation earlier, that what can you do about the blues? You can think about it, but you have also to accept that there are forces beyond yourself creating these systemic things that you struggle with. But that why history matters in this respect is that because over the past 40 years, the world has tremendously changed. One of the key elements of this change is globalization, the importance of EH&S as well for multinationals, the development of self-regulation. I mean, the importance for companies to kind of create their own safety management systems, and certification, the audit idea, that to make sure that you manage safety, it has to be auditable. You have to look into it through certification. You have to make sure that you've got the management system in place, often kind of demonstrated through procedures and things like this. So over the past 40 years, safety has been caught into a tremendous change consisting in regulating and proceduralizing work to an extent that has been unmatched in history. And therefore, people are struggling with this. It's what I'm saying here is pretty common thing now. A lot of people know about it and have been discussing about it. But what we're looking into right now and what we're discussing now is the possibility of reverting this and changing it. How much can we do this? Because as we know, history has a lot to do with what we experience. And the forces of history today are very much connected to globalization, certification, standards, legal requirements when it comes to HSE, and multinationals developing these systems to manage, and therefore creating sometimes very strong procedural requirements, and makes it very difficult for people, hence the blues and the discontent. So I'm not sure we can make a big change.
I do think we can make a big change. I think it's taking the elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's changed before to where we are now. We don't have much more time. I know we're running low on our time, but I do remember, back in 2005, workplace bullying was something that it would be like, oh, don't bother me with that fluff.
Yeah. You're
now
right.
it's understood that it is a mental trauma to people.
Yeah.
And we need to take it seriously, and I know when I'm talking with my friend Malcolm Staves of L'Oreal, he has no tolerance for that kind of stuff. So the leadership mentality is changing, and what we're finding as acceptable norms in the workplace is changing. So I think it's all good things. I would like to add that I think that in our next conversation, we could dive into something that I've talked about as a social worker, as the social safety system. I'd like to get into that with you. And also, and this is probably from your world also, is that I was always trained also about looking at the micro, the meso, and then the macro.
Yeah, I would like to add a fourth one, which is the MIGA.
Sure. Oh, can you explain that one?
Well, it's globalization. It's the fact that what we used to think in terms of national level of explanation has now to be included in a wider perspective, which is the mega perspective, which is the fact that most of what's going on these days, unless we make a number of changes, which might come depending on number of political decisions, but everything is quite strongly interconnected these days across the world. And therefore, it's not entirely new, but a number of things that happen at the national level is the result of things that go beyond the borders of a nation. And therefore, it has been something for me pretty important to include in the picture, but which is not something that you do naturally or easily because you have to work on it. It's the fact that globalized forces are around and therefore explaining a number of things that you can observe at the macro or even the micro level. So what's going on at the national level, what you would consider to be the macro level, has to be understood from a mega level, which is the globalization level. So that's something I've introduced recently in some papers, this kind of added level of explanation.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been amazing.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and everybody, you can see JC at the EH&S Congress happening September the 13th to 14th in Berlin. Just click on the link in the description if you'd like to find more information about that. And if you liked what you heard, you enjoyed our conversation, please click the like button to indicate that to others. And if you want to get notifications about what's coming up down the tubes at Safeopedia next, click on the subscribe. And are you looking for some great content to share out with your network and your teams? Then visit us at safeopedia.com. Until next time, stay safe.